So you want to make yourself some tapered planters. Except every tapered planter you see has a bunch of mitered cuts, angled cuts, beveled cuts, a bunch of cuts that you don't feel like dicking around with. What if I told you these planters right here are made entirely with straight cuts? They look pretty nice and they are super simple to make. And another nice thing about these planters is this is made entirely out of two 2x4s. Now you can use regular 2x4s, you can use pressure treated 2x4s, you can use cedar 2x4s. And with each layer being 1 inch thick, you can use any 4/4 lumber to achieve this design. White oak, cedar, the options are endless. But as far as this video is concerned, get yourself a couple 2x4s. They're super cheap to get, and make yourself a couple practice runs just like this before you get into some nicer wood. I've got printable plans available on my website for a really cheap price. That might be worth having for you. So with all that being said, let's jump into this build and make some tapered planters. Alright guys, so now for this project, I'm going to be using two 2x4s. Now I'm using just two regular 2x4s, but feel free to use pressure treated 2x4s. You could even get cedar 2x4s for this. Each 2x4 you're going to rip down into 3 1-inch thick pieces. Alright, so now you got 6 pieces, 1 inch by 1.5 inches. And now it's time to start getting these down to their lengths. Alright, so here is the cut list for this. Now, these are really easy cuts to make. There's just a lot of different cut lengths. I am just going to cut my lengths just using my crosscut sled on my table saw. And what I'll first start off by doing is just cutting off the end and giving me a clean edge to start from. And then I'll cut 2 at a time to the lengths I need. And as you can see, I have the cut list written down, and I'll just check off after each cut I make to keep me on track. But these can be cut many different ways. Being straight cuts, you could use a miter saw, you could use a circular saw if that's all you got. Honestly, this whole planter could probably be built with a circular saw. You would just have to be really careful making your rip cuts down the whole board. It might be easier to get like a 2x8 for that, or a 2x10 even. So as I said, yeah, there's a lot of cut lengths, but they're all either whole numbers or halves. So they're all in increments of half. So to organize these, to make it easier to put together, I organize them in rows. So I put each corresponding cut length into each row. Alright guys, so the way we're going to put these together is by rows. So this is going to be the top row because it's the largest. So this is the 12th row, 11th row, 10th row, and so on. So we're going to put them together starting with the top row. And obviously your shorter pieces are going to fit in between your longer pieces, just like that. That's row 1. The way it's going to be held together is you're going to take your next row, and then when this gets glued, this is what's going to be. Now this row is a little different, I must say, because this is where your handles are coming in. So just keep that in mind. So your 5.5 inch pieces are going to go here and here, covering those gaps. And when that gets glued, that is what's going to hold your other layer together. And another thing to keep in mind is each layer we do, we're coming in a 1/4 inch. So that's how it's going to go together. It's going to get glued and brad nailed like that. Grab my 3rd row. This is why it's kind of nice to have it in order. With each row you grab, you're going to take your longer piece out of that row, and that is going to span over the 2 that come together like this. That's basically what's going to hold that row together. And then I already know someone's going to ask, what do I do if I don't have a brad nailer? If you don't have a brad nailer, you can either use 1.5 inch screws, drywall screws, wood screws. If you want to go the really, really cheap route, it'll be a little more work and take a little longer, but you could get just a hammer and nails. Just 1.5 inch finish nails and a regular old hammer. Yes, it will take a little bit more time, but you can definitely still get it done. Alright, so once we get down to these last 8 pieces, as you'll see, there's only 2 different cut lengths here. So you'll put your next 4 pieces on the same way we have been, so where it's tapered in a 1/4 inch. And then once you get to your last 4 pieces, those are going to go directly under the last row you just put in. So they will not be tapered in. They'll be stacked right on top of each other, and those last 2 rows will be even. Now for this step, if you do not have a random orbital sander, I always recommend one of these. I'll link it below on Amazon, but this just takes normal random orbital sandpaper, but hook and loop, it sticks right on there. And it's a lot cheaper, and even if you do have a random orbital sander, I've got 2 or 3 of these that I always use. And you can just run it along, knock down the edges. But that's a lot cheaper alternative and comes in handy, even when I do have one of these. Woo! It is dumping out there. Okay, so after it's all sanded and prepped for finish, it was time to move on to which finish to use. So I actually made 2 of these, and the first one I started painting. My wife insisted that I would match it and paint this one as well, but I said, F it. I wanted to see what a stained one would look like. So that is what we're doing here. I am just using Minwax Special Walnut Stain. I'll have to put a top coat over this as well. So if you're planning on staining it and using it outside, I would use like a duck stain, and then you can apply it once and you're one and done. This is completely optional. I just finished it off with some top trim pieces. I had some scraps laying around, and this kind of gave it a finishing touch, but it is absolutely not needed. And let me show you the coolest thing about these. So when I make wood planters, I personally don't like making them where you're going to add the soil to the planter. What I like doing is buying a plant just like this with an existing pot, and I like being able to just set that pot in here. It doesn't get much easier than that. And let me show you this, how customizable this is. The way this is put together with 1-inch layers, each layer on the inside tapers out, and each layer gives you a ledge to put a bottom on. So this fern I got, it's just a hanging basket fern, and I took the top pieces off, is 8 inches tall. So I count 8 layers down, and I know that that's 8 inches, and I cut and measure a piece to put 8 inches down. But maybe you got a 6-inch pot. Count 6 layers down. Measure and cut a piece on that layer, and you got a 6-inch. If you got a really tall pot, place it right in the bottom, and you're good to go with a big tall pot. So this will work for pretty much any size pot you buy from a nursery. So there you go, the easiest tapered planters you're going to make. Let me know which one you prefer, stained or painted, down in the comments. And as always, I'll catch you guys in the next video.